That morning, I was wiping down the dining room table without so much as a single thank you. A mountain of used dishes was piled high in the sink. Crumbs from breakfast toast littered the floor. A load of wet clothes sat forgotten in the washing machine. The scent of mildew just beginning to rise. Still, I said nothing. I just quietly went about cleaning it all up. That's when I heard the voice from the living room. It's so convenient having a live-in housekeeper, isn't it? Especially one you don't have to pay. The voice, laced with a casual laugh, pierced my ears like a shard of glass. Housekeeper. I froze, my hand still gripping the damp dish towel. It slipped from my grasp and fell slowly, silently to the floor. I didn't talk back. I didn't cry. I simply stood there as I felt something deep inside my chest quietly shatter. But in that exact moment, I made my decision. I will leave this house. No, that's not quite right. The truth is, I had already been setting my plan in motion for 3 months. The property deed for this very house, the title transfer, consultations with a real estate agent, and, finally, the contract for an old bed and breakfast property in Vermont. I had arranged it all quietly, carefully, and with absolute certainty, so that no one would ever know. I had decided that I would transform myself from someone whose absence wouldn't be noticed into someone whose absence would create a void they could not fill. And so, a few months later, when they stood at the gate of my inn, heads bowed in contrition, I was no longer the woman they had once known. On the front door of that New Jersey home, a single piece of paper was taped to the glass. I'm sorry. You waited far too long for my heart to return. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 72 years old. For 30 years, I worked as the director of accounting for Seaboard Construction, a respectable mid-sized firm based out of northern New Jersey. I spent my days wrestling with numbers, and I was proud of the work I did. I remember the days I'd walk the construction sites, my hard hat on, discussing budgets with the foreman and the younger tradesmen, always looking for ways to trim waste and improve efficiency. Those memories are still sharp and clear. I lost my husband Robert when I was 55. It was stomach cancer. For the last 3 months of his life, he was in and out of the hospital, and it tore me apart to see the pain on his face. But I never left his side, not for a moment. I remember the last words he ever spoke to me. Eleanor, you have to protect this home, for us. I simply nodded. Immediately after the funeral, I began sorting through the house we had shared and the assets he had left behind. My mind was made up. With this money, I resolved, I will build a place where my children and grandchildren can live without a single worry. And so, I had a beautiful 2-story home built in a quiet, tree-lined suburb in New Jersey. I put the title in my son Michael's name. I saw it as fulfilling my husband's final wish. And I handed everything over to him without a moment's hesitation. Now, I believed with all my heart, we can finally have a life where the whole family can laugh together under one roof. The night before we moved, I stood alone on the balcony of our old apartment. A gentle breeze drifted across the river, softly caressing my cheek. This was the exact spot where Robert used to sit every single morning. The small wrought iron table and the weathered chair were still there, just as he'd left them, and they coaxed the memories forward. He always took his coffee with cream and sugar. I always took mine black. We would sit there for hours, just talking about nothing in particular, savoring the slow, easy passage of time. I closed my eyes and rested my hands on the cool metal of the railing. This was our last place together. Thank you for everything. I whispered the words into the evening air, fighting back the warmth that was rising in my eyes. Letting go of the home where we had lived for more than 30 years was not an easy decision. But after Robert was gone, the rooms felt cavernously large, and the emptiness seemed to seep into my own heart, widening the cracks that were already there. That was why, when I decided to move in with my son and his family, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, I can find my own place again, surrounded by the smiles of my family. Before our new life in the new house began, my heart was secretly fluttering with anticipation. In preparation for the move, I carefully selected all the furniture, the curtains, and the rugs myself. My budget was limited, but with each purchase, I felt a surge of affection, thinking, this is where our new life will begin. I was particularly fond of a small white bookshelf I chose for the living room. It was the perfect size for picture books to stand side by side. I imagined placing my granddaughter Lily's favorite stuffed teddy bear on top, and I dreamed of reading her one book from it every single night before she went to sleep. Next to the television, I placed the old brown wooden stool that Robert and I used to share, designating it as my official storyteller's seat. Back then, a single thought ran through my mind. I always believed that my golden years would be spent living peacefully, surrounded by the laughter of my children, gentle days, conversations around the dinner table, the warm touch of my grandchild's hand in mine. I believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that this was the greatest happiness life had to offer. But reality was a quiet, creeping loneliness that slowly began to stain everything. And I had no way of knowing then that even the small space I had carved out for myself would gradually, methodically be erased. The first few months were pure bliss. My granddaughter Lily would curl up on my lap to read her books. We would all sit down for dinner together, and she would exclaim with a bright smile, "Grandma's pot roast is the best in the world." The hours I spent in the kitchen, the effort of folding laundry, it all felt like a joy. But as time wore on, small changes began to ripple through the house. "Mom, that's okay, I can do that." "Grandma, are you just going to watch TV all day? That story again?" We've heard it 100 times. The words, once so gentle, gradually became tinged with irritation and a chilling coldness. One day, at Lily's birthday party, it was time to take a family photo. Everyone gathered together, smiling for the camera. Just as the picture was about to be taken, my daughter-in-law Jessica said, "Grandma, could you move a little to the side? You're blocking the view for the people behind you." I took a step back and stood against the wall, listening quietly to the click of the camera's shutter. That was the day it all changed. That was the day I began to transform from a member of the family into just an elderly person who lived with them. I was no longer told in advance about anyone's birthday, or a promotion at work, or a school celebration. I found myself unable to join the conversations at the dinner table. But I kept my silence. "It's up to me to make a place for myself in this house," I told myself over and over. I forced myself to believe it. So I woke up earlier than anyone else to prepare breakfast. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. I made sure the hot water heater was running so they would have warm showers before I had mine. But no matter how hard I tried, my presence became something they simply took for granted. The words, "thank you," eventually disappeared altogether. I set up a small bookshelf and a folding chair in the upstairs hallway, a little nook I silently called my room. I started living there, holding my breath, trying not to be noticed. Even so, whenever someone called out, "I'm home," I would force a smile and reply, "Welcome back." When they said, "We're heading out," I would nod and say, "Have a wonderful day." By performing these small rituals, I was desperately trying to protect my own position in the house, to earn the right to simply exist within its walls. But then, one day, a single, casual comment finally severed the last thread holding my heart together, and from that day forward, I secretly carried a new resolve within me. It was a Tuesday morning. When I woke up, the atmosphere in my room felt different. My familiar old wooden wardrobe, the one my husband had bought for me on our 5th anniversary, was gone. In its place, a child-sized shelving unit, overflowing with colorful toys and picture books, stood brazenly in the corner. Stunned, I walked out into the hallway. My daughter-in-law Jessica happened to be passing by. She glanced at me with a perfectly placid expression and said, "Oh, we were running out of space, so I had it moved to the storage locker." And with that one sentence, I understood everything. Without any discussion, without a single word to me, my belongings had been treated as clutter, as non-essential things to be quietly removed. I felt a cold knot tighten deep in my chest. Ever since I was a young woman, I've loved keeping things neat and organized. I've always believed that everything has its proper place. But now, to think that my world, my personal space, could be so easily erased, That night, after everyone was asleep, I quietly opened the hall closet. From a box tucked away in the very back, I pulled out an old manila envelope. Inside, carefully preserved, were the original title records for the house and the official deed showing the transfer of ownership. I had given them this house so that I could live out my final years in peace and security. But now, no matter where I stood in this house, I felt like a temporary guest, a boarder living on borrowed time. I traced the corner of the envelope with my finger and whispered silently into the darkness. Maybe signing over this house was a mistake. It was a long night, spent all alone in that dark room, contemplating where in the world I truly belonged. A few weeks later, one evening, I was in bed with a mild cold. I didn't have much of a fever, but my body felt heavy and leaden, and I had no desire to move. It was the time I would normally be in the kitchen starting dinner. But instead, I just closed my eyes, content to let the time pass quietly. That's when I heard faint voices coming from downstairs. So I'm thinking of hiring a cleaning service, maybe 3 days a week. I strained to listen. The voice was Jessica's, coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought she might be worried about my health, about me overexerting myself. But the words that followed sent an icy chill through my entire body. And if Michael's mother isn't going to pitch in anymore, we really need to keep our grocery bills separate. It's getting too expensive. The moment I heard that, my eyes snapped open in my bed. I stared up at the dark ceiling, and a part of me thought, with a sense of grim resignation, so, it's finally come to this. That evening, I was still feeling a bit weak, resting quietly in my room. Suddenly, I heard a clatter from the kitchen and opened my eyes. Through the crack in my door, I could see someone placing something on the kitchen counter. A short while later, the house filled with noise. Laughter, the clanging of a pot lid, the light, cheerful sound of silverware against plates. I pushed myself up and walked softly to the kitchen. There, sitting all by itself on the counter, was a single Tupperware container with a sticky note on the lid. "Heat this up before you eat." That was all it said. The message felt as clear as if it had been shouted, "You are not welcome at our table." I warmed the container in the microwave and sat down at the small breakfast nook to eat. Just then, I heard Lily's voice drift in from the dining room. "Isn't Grandma eating with us tonight?" My chest tightened, and my fork froze midway to my mouth. A moment later, Jessica's sharp, cold voice cut through the air. "Lily, I told you to be quiet." I listened to the sound of my family laughing together as I mechanically brought a forkful of rice to my lips. But I couldn't taste a thing. It was just texture, nothing more. With each bite I forced down, I felt more and more like I was an unnecessary object in this house. The warm steam rising from their shared dinner, the sound of my granddaughter's laughter, all of it was happening in a world separate from my own. What was the point of me even being here? I mumbled to myself. I set my fork down, closed the lid on the container, and pushed it away. Then I went to the closet, retrieved that old file again, and spread the land registry and title transfer documents out on my bed. I have to start over, I resolved quietly in my heart that night. I have to start again, right from here. The next morning, I woke up early, just as I always did, and made breakfast. The comforting aroma of brewing coffee and frying bacon filled the kitchen. The clock on the wall read 7 o'clock. But no one came. The plates of food I had arranged on the dining room table seemed to stare back at me in silence. Later that day, I opened my wallet to check my bank book and noticed a small discrepancy. A withdrawal of $500 had been made from the joint household account. I didn't have the debit card for that account, and I hadn't signed any withdrawal slip. It had all been done without my knowledge. In that moment, what I felt wasn't anger. It was a profound and hollow sadness. Perhaps I'm not part of this family anymore. I didn't say a word to anyone. I didn't complain or demand an explanation. I just quietly went to my room and opened my laptop. New Jersey home sale process. That search history was the beginning of my new life. The very next day, I made a phone call to an old colleague from Seaboard Construction, a man who had gone into real estate after he retired. I began consulting with a real estate agency. one I knew I could trust. Of course, I did it so that no one would notice. I made breakfast, I did the cleaning, and I went about each day with the same placid expression on my face, all while in the deepest corners of my heart, I was quietly preparing for my next life. At night, when the house was still, I would go into the small study alone and look over the files from my old job. Numbers are honest. When I lived in the world of numbers, I was filled with confidence. I had a feeling that I could get that sense of self back again. If I stay here any longer, my spirit will grow old along with my body. The moment I thought that, I felt something inside of me begin to stir, to move forward. I still remember the events of that afternoon as clearly as if it were yesterday. It was a weekend, mid-afternoon, and I was sitting in my chair doing some sewing. Suddenly, my granddaughter Lily came running into the room. She put her small hands on my knees and looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Hey, Grandma," she said. "You're the housekeeper that doesn't get paid, right?" In that instant, I thought my heart had stopped beating. I tried to laugh it off, to pretend it was nothing, but the needle in my hand was trembling, just a tiny, uncontrollable shiver. "Who told you something like that?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. With a face of pure innocence, Lily replied, "Mommy was just saying it on the phone." I felt something rising up from the pit of my stomach, a wave of emotion I couldn't name. Slowly, I stood up and walked down the stairs to the kitchen. There they were, my son Michael and his wife Jessica, standing side by side, preparing dinner together. I spoke quietly, but with a clarity that cut through the sound of chopping vegetables. I am not a housekeeper. This house was built with the inheritance my husband left me, and with my own. Retirement savings? This is my house. The words hung in the air, sharp and absolute. After a moment of dead silence, my son answered without even turning to look at me. "But you're not contributing to the household expenses anymore, are you, Mom? So I don't think you can really call it your house now." In that moment, I thought I heard the sound of something breaking. It was as if the very word, family, inside of me was cracking apart, shattering into 1,000 pieces. I didn't say another word in reply. I just turned around, walked quietly back to my room, opened the drawer of my desk, and took out a folder containing a document I had already started to fill out. It was one of those afternoons when I had the house all to myself. From the back of an old cedar chest, I gently pulled out a worn, leather-bound ledger. The corners of the cover were frayed, and the spine was slightly unstitched, a testament to the countless times it had been opened and closed. This was the accounting log I had kept every single day back when I was still working. As I turned the pages, I saw neat columns of fine print numbers, handwritten memos, minutes from budget meetings, and expense reports, all meticulously organized. Back then, no matter how busy I was, I found a deep sense of comfort in the time I spent with those numbers. "Eleanor, you're a lifesaver. That's why we have you, Ms. Vance. Absolutely brilliant." At the office, they called me Ms. Vance, and everyone, from the junior accountants to the site foreman, relied on me. As the end of the fiscal quarter approached, I'd stay late into the night, the sound of my calculator clicking away, feeling a surge of pride in being the first to produce a perfectly balanced and accurate financial statement. Numbers live in a world without lies. Every bit of effort was reflected in the results, and looking at a balanced ledger felt like clearing my mind, like bringing order to chaos. My eyes fell on a phrase I had handwritten in the margin of one of the pages: "To be the quiet support, the unseen foundation." I can't remember now what I was thinking when my younger self wrote those words, but for some reason, reading them again filled my chest with a gentle, spreading warmth. I felt more like myself back then, surrounded by numbers, than I ever do now. In this house, where I was no longer called by my name, but only Grandma, where my greetings were often met with silence, I felt my own identity fading, becoming something distant and unrecognizable. That night, after returning to my room, I carefully retrieved an old document box. Inside, lovingly preserved, were the deed to the condominium in the city that I had sold after my husband passed away over a decade ago, and more importantly, the title to the land on which this current house stood. It was true that the house itself was built under a joint title with my son, but the land alone had been purchased solely in my name. It was my individual inheritance, my personal asset, and the ownership was legally and unequivocally mine. Back then, I never could have imagined that I would one day be treated like a freeloader in my own home. Without telling a soul, I made copies of the documents. I quietly contacted the county clerk's office and a trusted real estate agent. I had no intention of starting a fight, but I was simply preparing to let go of this place on my own terms. While my son and his wife went about their lives, completely unaware, I had the land appraised and began discussing its sale with a reputable firm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cast any blame. I just moved in silence. Oh, that, I felt, was the only way to protect my last shred of dignity concerning what was, after all, my property. Inside that folder was the listing agreement I had prepared several weeks earlier. I picked up a pen, and with a hand that trembled slightly, I wrote my name, Eleanor Vance. After finishing my signature, I gently closed the folder and held it to my chest. On that day, something inside me was settled for good. I am going to leave this house. I didn't need anyone's permission anymore. It was my life, and I would be the one to decide its course. It was a night of quiet, unshakable resolve. For so long, I had chosen to look the other way, time and time again. The time I noticed money had been quietly withdrawn from my pension account. The times I was indirectly told I wasn't useful anymore. The days, stretching into weeks and months, that passed without a single thank you. Their family, I would tell myself. Things will change eventually. With that mantra, I kept making the coffee every morning, folding the laundry, and seeing them off with a smile and a cheerful, "Have a great day." But on that day, the moment my granddaughter asked me, "Grandma, are you the housekeeper?" Something inside me quietly crumbled. It wasn't about the money or the labor. It was the moment my pride as a member of this family was completely erased. With every instance that I chose silence, my existence must have slowly morphed into that of convenient, unpaid labor. When you remain silent, you are not met with gratitude. You are simply taken for granted and eventually treated with contempt. When I finally confronted that reality, I at last whispered to the deepest part of my soul, "This is not the family I raised." In the spring of my 65th year, I started attending a senior life planning seminar held at the local community center. My husband had passed away only a short time before, and my heart was still in disarray. I signed up for the course with the thought, from now on, I have to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. In that seminar, we learned about the intricacies of Social Security, about how to protect our assets, about estate planning, and, most importantly, we were taught to never rely on the goodwill of your children. Your retirement is your responsibility, the instructor said, her voice firm but kind. Do not simply expect your family to care for you. Instead, you must create options for yourself that allow you to live with them, not dependent on them. I remember how deeply those words struck me. I filled my notebook with meticulous notes, asked the financial planner countless questions after every session, and slowly learned the skills I would need to prepare for any eventuality. It was because of that seminar that I was able to handle the land title and the inheritance tax issues all on my own, without having to rely on anyone. I never imagined that the knowledge I gained back then would one day become the very tool that would protect me now. I was determined not to be just another silent victim. One day, as I was packing my things, a letter slipped out from between the pages of an old bank book I hadn't opened in years. The sender was my late husband, Robert. It was written shortly before he died, in the clear, strong handwriting he had before his illness took its final toll. Someday, it read, I want you to find a place that you love and start your second life there. I sank down onto the floor right where I stood, clutching the letter to my chest, and closed my eyes for a long moment. A place you love. That place was Cape May, down on the Jersey shore, where we used to travel together. We had often talked about opening a small inn there one day, a little place wrapped in the sea breeze. But life got in the way, and that dream had been buried somewhere deep inside me. But maybe now I could do it. I didn't have to ask anyone for permission. I didn't need to worry about being a burden. The time had come to walk my own path, on my own 2 feet. My late husband's words were a gentle push, encouraging me forward. At the end of May, I quietly left New Jersey and headed for Cape May. It was a place my husband and I had visited often when we were younger, the same place where we had dreamed of opening a small inn after we retired. As I stepped out of the station, the familiar scent of the ocean and the nostalgic salt air brushed against my cheeks. "Robert, do you remember?" I murmured to the sky, as if he were right beside me. Up that hill, there was that old vacant house we always had our eyes on. I went straight to a real estate office and scheduled a viewing for a property I had inquired about earlier. It was a former bed and breakfast, a renovated Victorian house that was at least 40 years old. It had been out of business for a long time, and the air inside was thick with dust and silence. But the moment I opened the front door, I felt it with absolute certainty. I think I think I can start my life over again, right here. The very next day, I finalized the paperwork to officially sell the house in North Jersey. By leveraging my sole ownership of the land, the sale went through smoothly, leaving me with approximately $35,000. It wasn't a fortune, but to get my own life back, it was more than enough. I purchased the old inn in Cape May, and the renovation work began in early June. Local carpenters and some younger folks from the town pitched in to help, and in less than 2 months, a small but warm and welcoming inn began to take shape. I named it the Saltwind Inn. For the sign, I used the beautiful calligraphy my husband had sketched out for our dream inn years ago. I found one of the original designs he'd done on a piece of parchment and, holding back tears, I hung it over the door. This old house on the Cape May coast? This was my new place in the world. The day I signed the contract and received the keys, I opened the front door to the smell of must and a profound silence. The wallpaper was peeling in several places, the kitchen faucet had a slow, persistent drip, and the old carpets were stained from years of neglect. What's more, for the first few days, I didn't get a single reservation. The phone never rang. But strangely, I felt no anxiety at all. I never expected things to go perfectly from the start. I tied on my old, familiar apron and slowly began to clean. As I wiped down the windows with a soft cloth, the feeling of personally putting a place in order, of making it my own with my own 2 hands, filled my heart with warmth. Then, I took a brush to a small wooden sign and wrote, "The Saltwind Inn. A place to rest your heart. Room and board provided." It wasn't just an advertisement. It was a promise, a wish that anyone who came to this inn might find there. Spirit softened, even just a little. I arranged each letter with care, pouring my hopes into the words. As I quietly set the sign up in the yard, with only the sea breeze for company, I thought with a deep sense of certainty, I feel like I've finally begun to live my own life. The inn's signature dish was a recipe I had recently perfected, a classic New England clam chowder. I used fresh clams from the local market, a carefully prepared broth of fish stock and herbs, and a secret blend of spices for the finishing touch. My first guest arrived on a weekend evening. She was a woman who looked to be in her early 50s, with a tired expression etched on her face. "A room for 2 nights, please," she said in a quiet voice, holding a single carry-on suitcase. As I helped her with her luggage and made small talk, she confessed in a soft, halting voice, "To be honest, I'd just gone through a divorce." That night, without a moment's hesitation, I decided to make the clam chowder that Robert had so often taught me how to perfect. The scent of the ocean, the gentle warmth of the broth, that familiar nostalgic taste made once again for someone else. When I placed the bowl on the table in front of her, she looked a little surprised, then slowly took a spoonful. And then, she gently set her spoon down, her eyes welling with tears, and said, "This tastes like my grandmother's kitchen. It's so comforting. It's been so long since I've tasted anything this kind." The moment I heard those words, A deep warmth spread through my chest. I smiled and gave a slow, quiet nod. Is that so? I'm so glad. That was the moment I understood, with perfect clarity. Maybe a person doesn't need a family, in the traditional sense, to be able to touch someone else's heart. Maybe a single bowl of chowder could gently cradle the soul of a perfect stranger, and that, I realized, was the beginning of the rest of my life. Word began to spread, and soon, young people who had seen posts on social media and older travelers on coastal drives began to find their way to my little inn. The 72-year-old innkeeper's soul-soothing clam chowder, the online review said. And before I knew it, a local television station came to do a small feature. My very first overnight guests were a pair of young women from New York City. That evening, as we sat by the crackling fireplace in the common room, I found myself sharing a little of my story with them. As I spoke, one of the women began to cry, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. I said some terrible things to my mother before I left home, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Tonight's dinner, it just tasted so much like home and it hurts. I didn't say a word. I just quietly placed a warm mug of herbal tea into her trembling hands. Here, I said softly, anyone is allowed to start over. The note she left in the guest book that night is one I will never forget. The salt air and a grandmother's cooking helped me feel a little kinder again. Thank you. I don't grieve the past I lost, the family that pushed me away. To me, being able to create a small, safe harbor in someone else's heart, is a far more precious thing. Listening to the sound of the waves under the bright moonlight, I took another quiet step forward. One afternoon, a soft-spoken man of small stature stopped by the inn unexpectedly. I write a travel blog for the local area, he explained, handing me his business card. I simply smiled and welcomed him inside. Please, make yourself at home. I didn't do anything special for him. That evening, for dinner, I served my usual New England clam chowder and a few small side dishes made with fresh vegetables from the farmer's market down the road. This has such a wonderfully settling taste. I remember him murmuring to himself, almost as if he were thinking aloud. It was a simple comment, but it stayed with me. It was only a few days later that things began to change. The phone started ringing with unfamiliar area codes, and my email inbox was suddenly flooded with inquiries. The number of calls about the inn had skyrocketed overnight. I saw you online. Is it true that the inn is run by a 72-year-old woman? Puzzled, I did a quick search on my laptop and found an article on a popular travel website. The headline was written in bold letters, "An inn that feels like a mother's embraces. A 72-year-old innkeeper on the coast gently heals the wounded hearts of travelers." The article continued, "In the quiet coastal town of Cape May, I found a bowl of chowder I'll never forget. And the pain I could never speak about to anyone, with her warm smile and her cooking, I felt it slowly begin to soften." The post had been shared more than 10,000 times in just 3 days. The comment section was overflowing with messages. I have to go there someday. I want to meet this grandmother. I need that kind of healing in my life. Staring at the screen of my laptop, I quietly held my breath. I had no idea that so many people were feeling this way, that they were all searching for a place where they could feel held. I looked down at the steaming bowl of chowder on my own kitchen table and whispered into the quiet of the room. Robert, I think I'm finally moving forward. If this little inn of mine can become a sanctuary for someone's heart, then maybe that's the meaning of my second life." On that particular afternoon, the rain was just a light drizzle, but a strong wind was blowing in from the ocean, making the wind chimes under the eaves sing a high, frantic tune. I was going about my usual routine, watering the potted plants by the entrance and wiping down the inn's sign, when I happened to glance toward the gate. Standing there were two familiar figures. It had been months since I'd last seen their faces, but they looked utterly exhausted, and a single rain-soaked suitcase sat at their feet. When our eyes met, they both lowered their heads slightly. "Mom, we're sorry. We're so sorry to come here like this. My son, Michael, spoke in a low voice. His head still bowed deeply as he stood on my doorstep. I lost my job. We can't make the mortgage payments anymore. His voice trailed off, thick with shame. And we were wondering if maybe you could lend us some money. I said nothing. I simply took a step back and opened the door wider. You must be cold. Come inside, get out of the rain. I led them to the small sitting room in the back and went to the kitchen to put on a pot of coffee. As I set out the mugs, my mind was racing, questioning myself over and over. These were the people who had treated me as if I were invisible. Now, in their time of need, they had come back, looking for a place of refuge. But I didn't want revenge. All I wanted was to do right by the person I used to be, the woman who couldn't find her voice on that night so long ago. I returned with the coffee and, speaking quietly through the rising steam, I said, I have no intention of blaming you. Life brings all of us to different places. That day, as I served them coffee, I didn't utter a single word of reproach. Instead, I simply handed them a manila envelope. My name is no longer on that house, I told them, offering a small, steady smile. Inside the envelope was a copy of the deed I had drawn up years ago. Tucked behind it was a single sheet of paper, on which I had written, with a hand that had once trembled, a short note. I thought I was building a house for people, but if the people are going to push me out of the house, then all I can do is change the place where I live. To me, that house had been a gift made from my husband's legacy and my entire life's work. But when that gift ceased to be about shelter and belonging, and instead became about ownership and control, something inside of me quietly came to an end. My son and his wife took the envelope and sat in silence for a long time, their eyes fixed on the floor. Still, all I said was, "Your coffee will get cold." On that day, I faced them not as their mother, but as a person living a completely different life. They finally looked up, and I could see a flicker of relief in their exhausted faces. When Michael bowed his head again, deeper this time, I watched him in silence for a long moment. The old me would have been waiting for this moment. I might have thought, finally, they understand, and felt a sense of vindication. But not anymore. I am a woman who is standing on her own 2 feet. A woman who has chosen a path from which she will not turn back. Quietly, but with unmistakable clarity, I spoke. If you only come to me when you need to be saved, then you're not looking for a mother. You're looking for a handyman. For a fraction of a second, his expression froze. But I continued, my voice calm and even, free of any emotion. My heart is no longer driven by anger or resentment. I simply want to be treated with dignity. As a person. The words were spoken softly, but their weight filled the room, saying everything that needed to be said. I have forgiven them, but I am not going back. They bowed their heads one last time and left without another word. Their backs, as they walked away, seemed smaller than I remembered. That night, alone, after I had closed the ledger for the day, I opened a window and breathed in the cool, salt air. I am no longer bound by the past, I thought. Even without the title of someone's mother, I am living my own life. And now, every single person I meet at this inn is teaching me a new way to be a family. After they had gone, I stood alone in the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. Cupping the warm mug in both hands, I stared out the window into the gathering dusk. There was a time when this kind of quiet would have terrified me. The thought that no one needs me, that I don't have a place anywhere in the world. That feeling used to tighten its grip around my chest until I could barely breathe, but not anymore. A thought surfaced in my mind, clear as a bell. It wasn't being alone that was lonely. It was being unneeded that was painful. I am no longer living my life for the sake of being needed by someone else. Even if no one relies on me, I have learned to feel the value in my own existence. The quiet passage of time, the warm aroma of tea, the distant sound of the waves, all of it gently soothes my heart. Time spent alone is no longer loneliness. It has become a precious, irreplaceable time to connect with myself. I am not afraid of being alone anymore. Because this is the life I have chosen for myself, and I am proud of it. The next morning, I woke early, as I always do. I swept the entrance to the inn and carefully wiped down the front desk. I brewed a pot of tea made from wildflowers I had picked and dried myself. The morning light, streaming through the window, seemed to gently wash away the lingering shadows of yesterday. Before long, an elderly couple arrived at the inn. They walked through the doorway with quiet smiles, and I naturally bowed my head in greeting. "Welcome. I'm so glad you're here." After I had checked them in and offered them some tea, the wife murmured, almost to herself, "It's so peaceful here." My heart feels so calm. Hearing her words, I felt a warmth spread deep inside my chest, and I smiled slowly. "Welcome," I said. "This is your home for today." I no longer wish to be called Mom. It's not about blood ties or last names. It's about creating a place where someone can feel, with a sense of relief, that they have come home. And here, in this little inn, that is the mission I quietly and proudly protect. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 72 years old. My room is a small one, up on the second floor of the inn. I wake to the soft morning light filtering through thin curtains, and I fall asleep to the whisper of the ocean. The stillness that I live with every day is something I never found in that house, when I was just a member of the family. At night, after closing my ledger, I pour myself a cup of tea and open my journal. It has become my daily ritual to carefully record the conversations I've had with my guests, the smiles I've seen, and the kind words they've offered me. The woman who stayed today, she reminded me so much of my younger self. A first-time guest told me he wants to come home here again. Each of these small entries has become my new form of family words. One evening, I found an unfamiliar envelope in the mailbox. When I opened it, I found a short letter written in a familiar, round script. "Dear Grandma, I'm sorry about before. Can I come and stay for 3 days?" The sender was Lily, the same little girl who used to ask so innocently, "Grandma, you're not coming today?" A small smile touched my lips. I tore the current month off the wall calendar, revealing the new one, and with a red pen, I gently circled a date. The day someone I truly want to welcome is coming home. There were no tears, just a feeling like a small, steady light had been lit somewhere deep inside my heart. It wasn't the warmth of spending time with someone that I had once craved so desperately. It was the pride of knowing that I could now welcome someone on my own terms, by my own choice. I am no longer a mother who endures for the sake of others, but I still want to be a person who can quietly offer someone a helping hand. This inn is the place of my second life, a place where I can transform sadness and regret into kindness and use it to welcome my guests. And it is a place where I might get to see my granddaughter smile once again. Have you ever been told that you are a burden in your own home? I built a house for my family. I devoted my entire heart to my life there. But one day, I was told, "You don't contribute anything anymore. This isn't your house." Ooh, those words are still lodged in my heart. If you, too, have ever been told that you are no longer needed, please write this in the comments. I didn't need a house. I just wanted to be seen as part of the family. If this story has left something in your heart, and if you are currently at odds with your own parents or grandparents, please share this video before they quietly walk away, before it's too late to ever go back. And please, consider subscribing to the channel, so that before you think it's too late, a small "I'm sorry" and "thank you" can find its way home. Today I am here at my inn, quietly welcoming whoever comes to my door, hoping, with all my heart, for the day when I can say, "Welcome home."